It's day 76 of 66 and 26. We are in the second to last reading we have from 1 Corinthians. We're in chapters 10 to 13. We'll have one more reading from 1 Corinthians next week. And some of these words might be very familiar to you. If you've ever been to a Christian wedding, you may have heard these words from 1 Corinthians 13. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal, and so on. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not rude, is not self-seeking, is not easily angered, right? These three remain: faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. So some familiar words. If, again, you've been to a Christian wedding before, you might not realize that those words are in the context of Paul talking about spiritual gifts. And Paul uses the entire chapter of 1 Corinthians 12 to talk about the giftedness that the Spirit of God gives to the people of his church. And we've talked about in the past how there was some dispute going on with the people of Corinth, and which prompted the writing of this letter from Paul. And apparently there was some conflict going on about how people viewed their personal spiritual gifts. And some people thought of themselves much more highly than they should, and considered their gifts more important than other gifts, as if they were more spiritual or more mature Christians if they had the gifts of speaking in tongues or the gift of healing or something like that. And Paul is saying, look, you could have the greatest of all gifts. You could speak in the tongues of angels. You could know prophecy, and you could have great wisdom. And yet, if you don't have love for others, then you gain nothing. You are nothing. And so when Paul is talking about the spiritual gifts, he's saying that everyone in the church is given gifts. They're all different, but by the same Spirit, and as he determines to give them. So God gives the gifts as he sees fit, and no one should think of their gift more important than the other. So if he uses the image of a body, and the body of Christ is made up of those who are something like an eye or a hand or a foot, and the eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you. And someone can't say, well, just because I'm an ear, or I'm a little finger or something like that, then I don't belong to the body, or I'm not as important to the body. And Paul is saying, no. Every single gift is important, and no one is more important than the other. The important thing is that whatever God has blessed you with, you use it for the sake of others. You use it in blessing and edifying the church and all those around us. So we actually find that in our reading today from 1 Corinthians 10 through 13, there's a common theme, and that is that everything that we do ought to be done for others. Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 24. Nobody should seek his own good, but the good of others. So when Paul is talking about the Lord's Supper in chapter 11, he's talking about discerning the body. And I don't think that Paul is actually talking about discerning whether the body of Christ is truly present in the bread during communion. I think when he's talking about discerning the body, he's talking about the body of Christ, the believers, the church, people who are gathered together in that place. And because Paul is criticizing the Corinthian Christians for getting together, and then some people are neglected and don't get to eat at all, and others are getting drunk on the wine. And so people are thinking about themselves instead of others. So the reading today from chapter 10 through 13, I think all of it is speaking about doing the things that God has called us to do in worship, in our daily lives, using our spiritual gifts. All of those things are done not for our own good, but for the sake of others. And in that way, we're actually following the law of Christ. And we're following the example of Christ, who gave himself, not thinking of himself, but he gave himself for us as a sacrifice to win us from death, the devil, and sin.